And good morning to you. At least it's morning for me. What it is for you, who knows? Just glad you're out of bed today. So we need to finish up Greece and have our Greek test this week. If you're reading the books, you'll want to email me and I'll give you questions and answers and we'll figure that all out. But we'll probably have a Greece test Thursday, Friday, so a couple days from now. We need to wrap things up. The Greeks had a interruption in their lives known as the Persian Wars. First, you had the Battle of Marathon. The Battle of Marathon, where the Athenians were able to defeat the Persian forces on the beaches of Marathon. They divide their army into three wings, a center, a right flank, and a left flank. When the Persians attacked, the center retreated while the flanks went around the sides and defeated the Persians, pushed them back to their ships. The Persians tried to race to Athens to get to Athens before the army was able to return, but they were unsuccessful. 10 years later, Xerxes invades Greece again with an army of 300,000. The Greeks decide to abandon Athens and to give Athens time to evacuate. 7,000 Greeks, including 300 Spartans, face off against the Persians at the Battle of Thermopylae. The Spartans and those Greeks are able to hold off the Persians for 3 days, and their heroic resistance, along with the sacrifice of their lives, inspires the Greeks to fight against the Persians, and inevitably they will defeat the Persian armies. Now, inspired by this, put this in your notebook if you haven't done so already. Inspired by this whole story, there are many that say, hey, wait a minute. If we can come together and defeat the Persians at Marathon, and if we can hold them off for days at Thermopylae, we have the better weapons, the better armor, the better training. We are the better soldiers. Some say, hey, let's unite and take the fight to the Persian Empire. Well, that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. The Greeks go back to their own city-states and they fight each other for many, many decades, actually. But there are some that keep this in mind and say, hey, wait a minute. Maybe someday, if only someone could unite us. And somebody's going to come eventually and unite the Greeks. And yeah, we're going to take the fight to Persia. That someone is a guy by the name of Philip of Macedonia. Philip II of Macedonia. Now, Macedonia is an area just north of Greece. It's in the mountains, it's in the hills. The Greeks consider these people backwards. Philip II of Macedonia said, wait a minute, if I could unite these Greek city-states, we could take on the Persians and do some damage. Philip II, he's pictured here without an eye. I believe he lost it in battle, but don't quote me on that. I get confused about eyes and who loses what. Philip of Macedonia, he divides the Greeks and conquers them. One by one, he is able to conquer the Greeks. Why is he able to conquer the Greeks? Because unlike the Persians, where the Greeks united against the Persians, the Greeks are not able to unite against Philip of Macedonia. He conquers all of Greece, and yeah, he unites them. Yeah, he conquers Athens. He conquers Sparta. The way he's able to do that is he makes a new type of phalanx, Macedonia, right up here. This new type of phalanx is known as the Macedonian phalanx. Now, you may recall the phalanx was like 8 across, 4 rows deep. This phalanx is a little bit larger. It is 16 across, 16 deep, with much, much longer spears. This Macedonian phalanx is an innovation in warfare. Using it, he conquers. Soon after he conquers all of Greece, however, Philip of Macedonia dies under mysterious circumstances. Some believe perhaps he was poisoned, and historically, Macedonian kings were often assassinated. They think maybe he was assassinated by his son and Philip's wife, the queen. We don't know that for sure. Either way, Philip of Macedon dies and his 19-year-old son takes over. Now, when his 19-year-old son takes over, many Greek city-states are like, okay, let's get rid of these Macedonians and let's rebel. However, the guy they're going up against, this 19-year-old, is not any ordinary 19-year-old. This is Alexander. Alexander, who will forever historically be known as Alexander Alexander the Great. Alexander crushes Greek rebellions by Athens, by Sparta, and with the Greeks united, he invades the Persian Empire. Now, his story is incredible. Over the next 10 years, Philip or Alexander the Great will never lose a battle. He will invade the Persian Empire and he will conquer Egypt, Mesopotamia, and he will march his armies all the way to India. Alexander the Great's goal was to conquer the world. He wanted to keep going until there was nothing left. He's considered the greatest general to have ever lived. Never loses a battle. Okay, he fights a couple stalemates, but he never loses. Alexander the Great believed he was a reincarnated Achilles. He thought he was Achilles come back to life. Now, he knew he wasn't invincible, but Alexander believed he could not be beaten. He slept at night with a copy of the Iliad, which is the story of the Trojan War, and a dagger underneath his pillow every night for fear of assassination. Alexander, unlike other generals, fought in the front of his men. Like, he did not fight in the back. He was always towards the front. Many, many times he almost dies in battle. And indeed, he suffers grievous, grievous injuries, which probably in the end will end up shortening his life. But he wins, he conquers again and again, battle after battle, chases down the Persian emperor, eventually has the Persian emperor is killed, and he conquers the Persian Empire and creates the world's largest empire the world has ever seen. Certainly the world's largest empire conquered in so short a time, in just 10 years. Now, Alexander's story, here you go. This is just a map of his travels, where he goes. And some of these dots here, he founds over 20 cities. Like in your notes underneath, put there, he thinks he's a reincarnated Achilles, slept with a dagger in the Iliad under his pillow. He founds 20 cities and names them all after himself. There's Alexandretta, Alexandropolis, Alexandretta, I think I said that one. Alexandria of Egypt is his most famous city that Alexander the Great founded. He even founds one city and names it after his horse. His horse Bucephalus. Bucephalus is the most famous horse in history. The story is that when Alexander was a boy, his father was thinking about purchasing this horse, Bucephalus. Bucephalus, however, every time someone would get on the horse would inevitably toss the rider and throw him. So Philip was like, okay, I can't buy this horse, but even though he's magnificent, he's too dangerous. Alexander told his father, "Father, buy me that horse." And Philip's like, "Alexander, you're stupid. The horse is obviously insane." Alexander's like, "Father, buy me the horse." And his father says, "I'll tell you what, if you can get on the horse and if you can ride him, I'll buy him for you." And Alexander says, "Sure." Alexander hops up on the horse, rides off into the distance, and rides back without any issue. Because what Alexander had noticed is that the horse was actually skittish and afraid of his shadow. And if you just point the horse away from his shadow, there wasn't any issue. It's actually a common issue with horses. If you go to some areas in cities where you have horse-drawn chariots and things like that, sometimes you'll see horses, and what they do is they have these little blinders on. And that's because sometimes horses see their shadow and they get spooked by their shadow. Bucephalus, most famous horse in history. Alexander will ride that horse the next 10 years, 15, 20 years. He'll ride it all during those years of his conquest. I got some video of Alexander and his horse down below. Great, great stuff. Alexander, the only reason he stops after 10 years at the edges of India, in which they were fighting elephants, is that his men, his Macedonians, the Athenians, the Spartans, they said, "Alexander, we can't go on. We will not go on. It's been 10 years since we've seen our homes and our families." And Alexander is so upset. And he'll convince them to go for another month and then another month. But eventually, Alexander is forced to stop. He's forced to stop because he's gravishly. He's wounded very, very badly. In the end, his horse, Bucephalus, is killed. That takes a lot of wind out of the sails. And Alexander agrees to stop. But it was only supposed to be for a very, very short time. When Alexander stops, he comes back to Mesopotamia. and I believe in the city of Baghdad or Babylon. In Babylon, Alexander takes a rest, but there he develops a fever, develops a sickness, and this is not what I want. Alexander the Great dies of fever at 32. Let me find that. Where is that? What you need to have in your notebooks is Alexander dies of fever at age 32. Why? He believed maybe he was poisoned. He might have been assassinated. Don't know. When he dies, his empire is broken up and divided among his generals. Pieces of it will survive for a time, but for the most part, his empire kind of just fades away. Why do we make a big deal about Alexander the Great's empire? Because again, he doesn't lose a battle. But the important thing, Greek culture, democracy, the philosophers, drama, theater, Olympics, all these Greek ideas will now be spread throughout Egypt, throughout Mesopotamia, throughout the entire empire. If you remember, we talked about Sargon, who conquered Mesopotamia. And the important thing about Sargon, the world's first emperor and the world's first empire, is he spread Sumerian ideas. Hammurabi's law becomes a big deal because Hammurabi conquers Mesopotamia and makes all those cities follow his law. When Alexander the Great conquers this huge empire, Greek ideas spread throughout, and Greek ideas thus will never die, and thus they come to us today. Make sure you have in your notes, Alexander the Great dies at age 32 of fever, and empire spreads his ideas. Okay, while for the students that are in school, probably do a review game tomorrow. Have a test on Thursday is the plan. Okay, hope you do well. Hope you're feeling all right, and we'll see you soon, hopefully. Probably next week. Maybe next week. By Friday, we'll start Rome, our final great topic of the year. It'll take us a while, the Roman Empire. All right, later on, if I can make this stop.